Hello, my VIPs, and welcome once again to Tales by Larinzy. This is a home of powerful stories, stories that teach, warn, inspire, thrill, and guide us in the journey of life. If you're new here, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to me and helps this story reach even more people. Before you listen to today's tale, I want you to understand something. This is not just a tale meant to entertain. It's a story about promises, sacrifices, and what happens when people forget the price that was paid for their blessings. Listen carefully because this story is full of lessons.
In the days when the ancestors still walked freely between the world of the living and the world of spirits, when the boundary between the two realms was as thin as morning mist, there existed a family upon whom misfortune sat like a vulture waiting for death. This was the family of Okoro, and their poverty was not the ordinary poverty that comes from laziness or misfortune, but a poverty that seemed woven into the very fabric of their existence, passed down from father to son like a terrible inheritance that could not be refused. Okoro and his wife Adana had raised 3 children in circumstances so dire that even speaking of them brought shame to their tongues. Their eldest son, Chaike, was a man of 30 years with shoulders broad as a doorframe and arms muscled from endless labor that bore no fruit. He had married Ngozi, a patient woman whose beauty had faded early under the weight of perpetual hunger and disappointment. They had 3 children who wore rags and knew the taste of suffering before they knew the taste of mother's milk. The middle child was Obina, 28 years old, quick-witted and gentle-souled, married to a woman named Chiamaka, whose very name meant God is beautiful, though there was little beauty to be found in their circumstances. Chiamaka was heavy with their first child, her belly swollen with promise, even as their food stores remained desperately empty. She moved slowly through their compound, one hand always resting on her unborn child, as if to protect it from the curse that seemed to chase their family like a persistent shadow. The youngest was Amara, their only daughter, 25 years old, and married to a man named Easy from a neighboring village. Easy was a good man, hard-working and devoted, but he had not known the depth of the curse that came with marrying into the Okoro family until it was too late. Now his own modest fortunes seemed to be slowly draining away, as though the curse were a contagion that spread to anyone who dared to love them. All 3 siblings had married with hope in their hearts, believing that perhaps love and new families would break whatever evil spell hung over them. But the curse proved stronger than hope, deeper than love, more enduring than any human intention. Chaik's business ventures collapsed one after another. Obina's crops withered while his neighbor's fields flourished. Amara's husband found his fishing nets empty day after day, even as other fishermen brought in abundant catches from the same waters. It was a poverty so complete, so absolute, that it defied natural explanation. The family worked harder than anyone in the village, yet they remained the poorest. They prayed more fervently than the most devoted worshippers, yet their prayers seemed to bounce off the sky like stones thrown at a mountain. They consulted local priests who shook their heads in confusion, unable to explain why the gods seemed to have turned their faces away from this family with such deliberate cruelty. The children of Chike went to bed hungry more nights than not. Chiamaka, in her pregnancy, craved food she could not have, and Obina would watch her with anguish in his eyes, knowing that the child growing in her womb was being formed from deprivation rather than nourishment. Amara wept in secret, ashamed that her marriage had brought her husband nothing but hardship. Watching his love for her slowly become tinged with resentment, he tried hard to hide. One evening, as the Harmattan winds blew dust through their separate compounds, the three siblings met at their parents' home, sitting beneath the same udala tree under which they had played as children, back when they still believed that adulthood would bring solutions to their family's problems. "We cannot continue like this," Chike said, his voice heavy with the authority of the eldest. "My children are growing up knowing only hunger. My wife looks at me with eyes that no longer hold respect. I am a man, yet I cannot provide for my family. This is not life. This is slow death." "Chiamaka is with child," Obina added quietly, his hands clasped tightly together. "In a few months I will be a father. But what kind of father brings a child into such suffering? We must know the truth,
Man watches
no matter how terrible it might be.
I wait
The journey to see Okonkwo required resources they barely possessed. Chiamaka, despite her pregnancy, insisted that Obina take the few cowrie shells they had saved, placing them in his hands with tears in her eyes.
Instead,
"Go," she whispered. "Find the answer.
I see it in his
Our
family's
child deserves better than this."
They wonder why.
Gozi gave Chike the silver anklet her own mother had given her.
They are
the only thing
to
of value
hate me,
she
and
owned.
I cannot blame
Easy, despite his growing
Chike who
doubts,
finally
contributed
spoke
what
words
little
they
he
had
could
all been
spare
thinking.
for Amara's journey.
We must consult.
They set out at
Okonkwo,
first light,
the great
three figures
seer who
moving
lives
through
on
the early morning
Anya.
mist, like ghosts,
anyone can tell us
their
the source of
shadows
this
long
curse and
and
how to
thin
break
before
it.
them.
It is him.
They walked for 3 days through forests thick with secrets and across rivers that sang songs of ancient sorrows. They passed through villages where people looked at them with a mixture of pity and suspicion, for poverty clings to a person like a smell, marking them as cursed or condemned. On the 3rd day they climbed Ugwu Anya, the mountain of the eye, where it was said the spirits could see all things, past, present, and future, truth and lies, the living and the dead. The path wound upward like a serpent, and their legs burned with exhaustion, but they pressed on, driven by desperation, sharper than any physical pain. Okonkwo sat before his cave, as if he had been waiting for them since the beginning of time. He was ancient beyond measure, his body dried and weathered like wood that has stood for centuries in sun and rain. His eyes were white as chalk, yet they seemed to see everything, to look not at you but through you, into the very core of your being. "Children of Okoro," he said before they could speak, his voice like wind through hollow reeds. "You carry the weight of 7 generations on your backs. Sit. I will tell you what your ancestors have been too ashamed to speak." They sat, their hearts pounding, as Okonkwo began to speak. He told them of their ancestor, the first Okoro, who had been a trader in human flesh during the time when pale-skinned strangers came in great ships to buy men and women as if they were cattle. He told them how this ancestor had grown wealthy beyond measure by selling his own people into chains, separating families, destroying lives, accumulating blood money without a thought for the suffering he caused. One day, Okonkwo continued, his blind eyes seeming to see that distant past more clearly than the present. Your ancestor purchased a young woman who was pregnant, her belly full with child. Her husband, who had been captured with her, was sold to a different trader, sent to a different ship, never to see his wife or unborn child again. That woman was dragged onto the slave ship screaming, her hands reaching back toward the land that was being stolen from her, toward the husband she would never see again, toward the future that had been ripped away. The seer's voice grew heavy with the weight of old sorrow. As the ship pulled away from the shore, as she watched her homeland disappear beyond the horizon, as she felt her unborn child kick in her belly, she called down a curse with the power of a mother's anguish.
a wife's despair, and a victim's righteous rage, she cursed your ancestor and all his descendants unto the 7th generation. She declared that as he had grown rich on the poverty and suffering of others, so would his children know only poverty and suffering. As he had torn apart families for profit, so would his own family be forever torn by want and deprivation. And she pronounced that only blood could pay for blood. Only a life freely given could break what greed and cruelty had forged. Silence fell over the mountaintop like a heavy blanket. The 3 siblings sat frozen, horror and understanding dawning in their eyes. They were paying for sins they had not committed, suffering for crimes they had not perpetrated, bound by chains forged in their ancestors' heartlessness. "What must we do?" Obina finally asked, though his voice shook with fear, for he suspected he already knew the answer. Okonkwo's face held infinite sadness. "The curse is clear and cannot be bargained with. A life must be given, not taken in murder, not lost in accident, but offered freely and willingly as payment for the life destroyed by your ancestor. One of the bloodline must choose to die so that the others may be freed from this generational bondage. It is a terrible price, but the spirits demand what the spirits demand." "There must be another way," Cheeky said desperately. "We could make offerings, perform rituals, sacrifice animals." "Do you think your ancestors did not try all of this?" Okonkwo interrupted gently. "For 7 generations your family has sought another way. There is none. The woman who cursed your line died in chains in a foreign land, her child born into slavery and dying before seeing freedom. The magnitude of that suffering demands equivalent payment. The woman who cursed your line died in chains in a foreign land, her child born into slavery and dying before seeing freedom. The magnitude of that suffering demands equivalent payment. The spirits do not deal in half measures. They descended the mountain in silence, each wrapped in their own terrible thoughts. They made camp that night in the forest, but sleep would not come to any of them. They lay under the stars, those ancient witnesses to human joy and human sorrow, and each wrestled with the impossible question, who among them would die so that the others might live? The discussion that followed was unlike any conversation they had ever had. It was Cheek who spoke first, claiming the right as the eldest to make the sacrifice. "I am the firstborn," he argued. "The responsibility should fall to me. My children are older. They will remember me and understand. Ngozi is strong. She will survive without me." But Amara shook her head violently. "You have 3 children, Chaike. 3 children who need their father. How can you speak of leaving them? At least I have no children yet, and Izzy could remarry, could find a woman not cursed as I am." "No," Obina said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made them both fall silent. "It should be me." "Brother, you are about to become a father," Cheek began, but Obina raised his hand. "Listen to me, both of you. Listen with your hearts and not just your ears. Chaik, you have 3 children who need you. Your family is established, and when the curse is broken, you will be the one who can lift our family from poverty to prosperity. You are strong, capable, and you have the years of experience in business that will serve you well. You must live to build the future for all of us." He turned to Amara. "Sister, you are married to a good man who loves you. When the curse is broken, that love will flourish instead of being poisoned by poverty. You will have children, many children, and they will grow up in prosperity instead of want. You must live to be the mother you were meant to be." "And what of your child?" Amara demanded through her tears. "What of Chiamaka?" Obina's face showed his pain, but his voice remained steady. My child is not yet born. He or she will not remember me, will not grieve for a father never known. Chiamaka is young and beautiful. She can remarry, can find a husband who can give her the life she deserves, a life I have never been able to provide. Of all of us, my death will cause the least ongoing suffering. That's not true, Cheek protested. You are our brother. Your life is not worth less because you have fewer children or fewer years of marriage. Perhaps not in the eyes of love, Obina agreed. But in the eyes of practicality, in terms of who can best build our family's future when the curse is broken, the answer is clear. Besides, and here his voice softened, became almost tender, I have made peace with this. Last night, as I lay awake, I felt something I have not felt in years. I felt purpose. My entire life has been a struggle against circumstances I could not control, against a curse I did not create. But this I can control. This I can choose. I can be the one who breaks the chains. I can be the one whose name is remembered as the savior of our family. There is honor in that, nobility in that. Let me have this. They argued through the night and into the next day, but Obina's resolve did not waver. Finally, as dawn broke on their second day of travel home, his siblings realized that his mind was made, and nothing they said would change it. I have only one request, Obina said as they walked. One condition for my sacrifice. Anything, Chike and Amara said in unison. Chiamaka will give birth in a few months. My child will come into this world fatherless, and Chiamaka will be a widow before she has truly been a wife. When the curse is broken, when prosperity returns to our family, and it will return, I know this in my bones, I want you both to promise me that you will care for them. Not just send occasional gifts or visit when convenient, but truly care for them. I want my child to grow up knowing no want, to have opportunities I never had. I want Chiamaka to be provided for, to be respected, to be treated as a cherished member of our family. Promise me this, swear it by the ancestors, by the spirits, by everything we hold sacred. Chike gripped his brother's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. I swear it, brother. I swear on my own children's lives that your wife and child will be cared for as if they were my own. They will want for nothing. This I promise you. Amara embraced Obina, her tears soaking his shoulder. I swear it too, brother. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, and those you leave behind will be loved and provided for. This I promise with every breath in my body. Obina smiled then, a smile of peace and certainty. Then I go to my death content, knowing that my sacrifice will not only break the curse, but will ensure a good life for the woman I love and the child I will never meet. This is enough. This is more than enough. 3 weeks later, following the precise instructions Okonkwo had given them, Obina went to the sacred grove at the village boundary when the moon was dark and the veil between worlds was thinnest. He went alone as required, carrying offerings of palm wine and kola nut, white chalk and bitter herbs. He carved his family name into the ancient Iroko tree, and beside it he carved the name they had learned, Adaiza, the name of the pregnant woman their ancestor had sold into slavery, the woman whose curse had bound them for generations. Adaize, he spoke into the darkness. I am Obina, son of Okoro, descendant of the man who destroyed your life and stole your future. I cannot undo what was done to you. I cannot bring back your husband or save your child, but I can offer you what you asked for blood, life for life. I give my life freely, with full knowledge and willing heart, as payment for my ancestors' sin. I ask that you accept this sacrifice and release my family from your righteous curse. Let my death purchase their freedom." The ritual that followed was known only to Obina and the spirits. When the village elders found his body the next morning at the foot of the Iroko tree, there was no blood, no sign of violence or struggle. He looked as though he had simply laid down to sleep, and on his face was an expression of profound peace, as though at the moment of death he had seen something beautiful beyond description. The funeral was modest, for the family still had no resources for elaborate ceremonies. Chiamaka wept over her husband's body, her hands resting on her belly where their child grew, a child who would never know its father's face. But even in her grief she noticed something strange. The air felt different, lighter somehow, as though a great weight that had pressed down on all of them for so long had suddenly lifted. The change was not gradual, it was immediate and undeniable, like the breaking of a dam. Within days, Chike was approached by a wealthy merchant who had heard of his reputation for hard work and integrity. The merchant offered him a partnership in a trading venture, an opportunity that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Within a month, the venture had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, and Cheek found himself with more money than he had ever possessed in his entire life. Old Okoro's crops, planted in desperation before Obina's death, suddenly flourished with abundance. The rains came at exactly the right times, the sun shone with perfect warmth, and the harvest was so bountiful that the family was able to sell the surplus at the market for good prices. Amara's husband, caught so many fish that his nets nearly broke under the weight. Other fishermen began to ask him where he was finding such abundance, unable to understand how his fortune had turned so completely and so suddenly. The curse was broken. After 7 generations, the chains were shattered. The poverty that had defined the Okoro family for as long as anyone could remember was lifting like morning mist burned away by the sun. Cheek's success continued to build upon itself. Within 6 months, he had established himself as one of the most successful traders in the region. Within a year, he had built a new compound, large and beautiful, with strong walls and a roof that gleamed in the sunlight. He bought land, hired workers, invested in multiple ventures. Everything he touched seemed to turn to gold, as though the universe were paying back all the suffering his family had endured with compound interest. The transformation was so complete, so total, that people who had known the Okoro family before could barely believe what they were seeing. The family that had been synonymous with poverty and failure was now becoming synonymous with success and prosperity. But in the midst of this dramatic transformation, something else was happening. Something subtle at first, but growing more pronounced with each passing week. Chiamaka gave birth to a son 3 months after Obina's death. She named him Obina, after his father, and the child was healthy and strong, with his father's gentle eyes and quick smile. But raising a child alone, even with the support of her own family, was difficult. The child needed clothes, needed food, needed medicine when he fell ill. And Chiamaka, as a young widow, faced an uncertain future. She waited for Chike and Amara to fulfill their promises. She waited for them to come and offer the support they had sworn to provide. She waited with patient hope, believing that they were simply busy, that they would come soon. Chike did come once, about a month after the child was born. He arrived at Chiamaka's family compound dressed in fine clothes that spoke of his new wealth, and he brought gifts: a bag of yams, some dried fish, a cloth wrapper for Chiamaka. The gifts were generous by the standards of the old poverty, but modest compared to Cheek's new circumstances. "Sister," he said, for that was how he addressed his brother's widow, I have brought these for you and the child. I hope they help." Chiamaka accepted the gifts with gratitude, but there was a question in her eyes. "Brother Chaike, your brother made me promise to remind you of the oath you swore. He wanted to ensure—" "Yes, yes, I remember," Cheek said quickly, a note of discomfort in his voice. "I am fulfilling that promise now. These gifts should help you for some time. I must go now. I have a meeting with some merchants from the coast. Important business, you understand." And he was gone, leaving Chiamaka standing in her compound with the gifts in her arms and doubt beginning to take root in her heart. Amara visited as well, bringing a basket of fruit and some clothes for the baby. She cooed over young Obina, holding him with tears in her eyes. "He looks just like his father," she whispered. "The same eyes, the same smile." "Sister Amara," Chiamaka said gently, "do you remember the promise you made to Obina? He spoke of it often in those last days, how much comfort it gave him to know that his child would be cared for." Amara's face flushed. "Of course I remember. And I am caring for you, am I not? These gifts—" "The gifts are appreciated," Chiamaka said carefully. "But Obina spoke of something more. He said you promised that his child would want for nothing, that I would be provided for as a cherished member of the family." "And you are," Amara insisted, but her voice was defensive now. "But you must understand, Chiamaka. I have my own family to think of now. Izzy and I are building our own future. We cannot simply—" She stopped, realizing how her words sounded. "I will visit again soon," she said quickly, and departed. But the visits became less frequent. The gifts became smaller. And gradually, as weeks turned into months and months turned into a year, Cheek and Amara's visits became rare, then stopped altogether. Chaik had become consumed by his business empire. His trading ventures had expanded to multiple cities. He was dealing with merchants from distant lands, and his responsibilities had grown exponentially with his wealth. There were always meetings to attend, contracts to negotiate, opportunities to pursue. Time became his most precious commodity, and he hoarded it jealously, spending it only on activities that would increase his wealth and status. When he thought of Chiamaka and his brother's son, and he did think of them in quiet moments late at night, he felt a twinge of guilt. But he had sent gifts, hadn't he? He had helped. Surely that was enough. Besides, Chiamaka had her own family to support her. Why should he bear the full responsibility? He had his own wife and children to think about, his own future to secure. The truth, though he would not admit it even to himself, was that Chiamaka and young Obina were uncomfortable reminders of the past he was trying to forget. He had reinvented himself, become a new person, a wealthy and respected trader. His new friends and business associates knew him only as a successful man, not as the desperately poor wretch he had been just 2 years before. The story of the curse, of the sacrifice, of the brother who had died. These were not things he wanted to speak about. They belonged to a past he was leaving behind. Amara had her own reasons for staying away. Her husband, Iz, though he had loved her, had never quite gotten over the resentment from the years when her curse had infected his fortunes. Now that they were prosperous, he wanted to focus on their own growing family. When Amara spoke of visiting Chiamaka or providing more substantial help to her nephew, Ezzy would grow cold and distant. "How much more must we give?" he would ask. "Obina was your brother, not mine. His widow is not my responsibility. We have our own children to provide for, our own future to secure. You cannot keep sacrificing our family's resources for them." And Amara, who had spent years watching her husband's love turn to resentment because of her family's curse, was terrified of losing that love now that she finally had prosperity. So she stayed away, telling herself that she would visit soon, that she would provide help soon, but that soon kept getting pushed further and further into the future. Chiamaka watched her small supply of resources dwindle. The gifts from Chike and Amara had long since been used up. Her own family helped as they could, but they were simple people with modest means. Young Obina grew, and with each passing month he needed more. More food, more clothes, medicine when he fell ill. Chiamaka struggled, working as a seamstress, taking on any job she could find, but it was never quite enough. She would look at her son, seeing his father's face reflected in his features, and her heart would break. Obina had died believing his child would be cared for, believing his sacrifice would purchase not just freedom from the curse, but security for his family. He had gone to his death with peace in his heart because of the promises Chike and Amara had made, and those promises had been broken. She considered going to Chike's grand compound to confront him, to remind him of his oath. But pride stopped her. She could not bear to go begging, to stand at his gate like a supplicant while he lived in luxury purchased with her husband's blood. And part of her feared that if she did go, if she confronted him directly, he would simply turn her away, and then she would have to face the full reality of their betrayal. So she said nothing, did nothing, and suffered in silence. But silence, as any wise person knows, does not mean the problem has gone away. Silence simply means the pressure is building, waiting for release. Young Obina was 2 years old when the hauntings began. It started with dreams. Cheek began to wake in the night, sweating and terrified, from nightmares in which his brother stood before him, silent and accusing. Sometimes Obina would simply stare at him with eyes full of hurt and betrayal. Sometimes he would speak, asking over and over in a voice that echoed with the timbre of the grave, "Why have you forgotten us? Why have you broken your promise?" At first, Chak told himself these were merely guilt-induced nightmares, the product of an overactive conscience. He tried to ignore them, to push them from his mind, to bury them under the demands of his daily life. But the dreams became more frequent, more vivid, more terrible. Then they began to affect his waking life. He would be in the middle of a business negotiation and suddenly feel an overwhelming presence, a cold certainty that someone was standing behind him. He would turn to look and see nothing, but the feeling would not fade. His concentration began to suffer. Deals that should have been simple became complicated. His judgment, usually so sharp, became clouded. Then Chike began to see the ghost directly. The first time he was walking through his compound at dusk and saw a figure standing in the shadows near the wall. For a moment he thought it was one of his servants, but then the figure stepped into the light and Cheek's blood ran cold. It was Obina, or rather the ghost of Obina, transparent and ethereal, staring at him with eyes that held a depth of sorrow and betrayal that Cheek could barely stand to witness. "Brother," the ghost whispered, and its voice was like wind through dry leaves, like the rustle of burial clothes, like the sound of earth falling on a coffin lid. "You promised." Chike screamed and ran, but the ghost followed. It appeared again the next night and the night after that, and soon it was appearing during the day as well, manifesting in the market when Chike was conducting business, appearing in the meeting houses where he negotiated contracts, standing silently in the corner of his bedroom while he tried to sleep. The ghost never threatened, never attacked. It simply appeared and stared, its presence a constant reminder of broken promises, of a sacrifice dishonored, of a family abandoned. And somehow this silent accusation was more terrifying than any violence could have been. Chaik's business began to suffer seriously. His partners noticed his distraction, his strange behavior, the way he would sometimes cry out at empty air or argue with someone no one else could see. They began to wonder if he was losing his mind, and merchants are not inclined to do business with madmen. Contracts were cancelled, partnerships dissolved, opportunities evaporated. His wife, Ngozi, confronted him. "What is happening to you, husband? You wake screaming in the night. You see things that are not there. You are destroying everything we have built. What demon has possessed you?" But Chaik could not tell her. How could he admit that he had broken a sacred oath, that he had betrayed his brother's memory, that he was being haunted by the ghost of the man whose death had purchased their prosperity? Amara fared no better. The ghost of Obina began to appear to her as well, manifesting when she was alone, standing silently in her compound, appearing at the... Amara didn't escape either. Obina's ghost began to appear to her when she was alone, first like a trick of guilt, then so real she couldn't deny it. In dreams, it showed her Chiamaka struggling to raise young Obina while Amara lived in comfort. The ghost never spoke, but the message did. You promised, you swore, you broke it. Izzy watched his wife unravel, hollow-eyed and jumpy, and he got angry. "Why can't you enjoy what we've finally gained?" he asked. Amara had no answer that could silence the truth. They had not kept their oath. Then the hauntings spread. The spirit appeared to children, servants, even in public places, turning markets and compounds into scenes of panic. Rumors followed. The Okoro family's curse had returned. People avoided Chike. Business cooled. Priests and diviners took his money and offered rituals that changed nothing. Desperate, Chike returned to Ugwu Anya and met Okonkwo again. The seer told him plainly, the sacrifice was already made. What was missing was honor. Care for the widow and the child as promised, and the spirit will rest. Chaik went straight to Amara. Both of them, already broken by fear, finally understood what the ghost was demanding. Together they visited Chiamaka, dressed simply, arriving unannounced. They knelt, confessed their neglect, and begged forgiveness, swearing new oaths they would not break. Chiamaka listened, steady but wounded. Obina died believing his family would be safe, she said. What would she tell their son? That his father was a hero, or that his sacrifice was wasted? Amara promised action, not talk. The boy would lack nothing, and Chiamaka would be treated with dignity. Chiamaka accepted but warned them, "Break this again, and no sacrifice will save you. The dead do not forgive twice." Redemption became daily work. They moved Chiamaka and the boy into a fine house near Chike, provided help, food, clothing, and stability. More importantly, they gave respect and family. Chaik visited often, raised the boy like his own, paid for the best education, and told him stories of his father's courage. Amara returned as a sister, not a visitor with gifts. Chike built a shrine in Obina's honor and made sure everyone knew his prosperity was built on his brother's blood. As the promises became real, the hauntings stopped. Obina's ghost appeared one last time to Chaiki, peaceful now, thanked him, and faded like mist. It appeared once more to Amara, told her she had been blind but now could see, and urged her to keep watch with love, not fear. Then it vanished. After that, Cheek's business flourished, but he handled wealth differently, with generosity and restraint. Young Obina grew into a capable man, became Chaik's partner, and expanded the trade. Chiamaka lived honored and provided for, never remarrying, loyal to the memory of the man who died for them. The village turned the whole story into a warning. Promises to the dying are sacred. Prosperity is meaningless if it isn't shared, and neglect often starts quietly, not cruelly. The shrine became a place where people came to seal vows, seek strength, and remember obligations. On Obini's anniversary, the family held feasts to celebrate his courage, and elders retold the lesson to the young. Cheek died old, asking to be reunited with his brother, confident he had finally kept his word. Amara lived long too, carrying the scar of her failure but turning it into purpose, becoming a fierce defender of widows and orphans so nobody else would be abandoned the way Chiamaka had been.
If the story touched you, then it did its job. Because stories like this are not meant to scare us. They are meant to remind us to keep our promises, to honor sacrifices, and to never forget the people who suffered so that we could stand where we are today. Here on Tales by Larinzy, I tell African stories that carry deep meaning. If you believe stories should teach, warn, and stay with you long after listening, then subscribe to this channel. Like this video, share it with someone who values loyalty and honor, and turn on notification so you never miss out on any of our tales. Till next tale, stay blessed. I love you all.